This is Join the Dots. Hello, this is day 9 of COP26, 9th of November 2021. I want to cover 2 issues today. One is observations from a meeting I attended, and the second is the issue of migration and relationship to climate change. The meeting I attended took place in meeting room 5. It was actually country representatives, party representatives, going through the text of the agreement on long-term climate finance, the 100 billion figure that you've heard that was committed in Paris, and we're still getting pledges towards it. So it turned out it wasn't intentional, but I found it in the program today. I couldn't go into meeting room 5 because I'm not a party representative, but I could go into room 7 to watch the proceedings on several screens. And the process is that all the parties sit around a massive table. So even in the observation room, there was at least 80 people, and more came in. And there were people taking word by word notes of what each country representative was saying, how they were suggesting to edit the text. And the process was actually quite similar to the ISO meetings I've been to, ISO being International Standards Organization, where the text is put on the screens and everyone goes line by line, or in this case, paragraph by paragraph. And you raise your hand, and when your microphone is on, you give your edit. The edits could be just one word. There was a lot of discussion whether the parties welcomed or just noted certain things. Or there are certain words that commit the parties to something. For example, everyone could agree, this is just an example, everyone could agree an increase in the funding, but not everyone would want to agree how much that increase should be. So there was a lot of discussion about that. I'm not actually quite sure if I'm allowed to talk about the more nitty-gritty things, but there was a woman from one country who made quite a passionate argument for a particular edit. And the gist of her argument was that the words in the agreement had to reflect the many statements and promises that were made by all the leaders who have spoken at COP so far. I thought it was quite passionate, touching, and really well put argument. But yes, as I said, I don't know how much of the more details that I can give, and I was in the meeting for an hour. I'm sure they stayed for many, many more hours. The process for the day was that this in the morning was the first reading of the text, and the co-chairs were going to take all the comments during the meeting, edit the text again, and bring it for second reading at the second meeting of the day at 6 p.m. And I'm sure there will be many more meetings on that text, because in about an hour that I watched, we managed to move to paragraph 11. I couldn't see from that distance how many pages there were in the agreement, but I'm sure there were many. Anyway, I hope I haven't breached any confidence here, but I'd like to say that the room that I was in were really full of people who were very carefully listening to the discussions. They weren't there just because they had accreditation. They were very carefully taking notes. I could see, calculating things in their heads, trying to find ways to do their jobs the best they can. And there was a camaraderie around the table that I could observe. We were all there to do something. Obviously, people had more important roles than I had as a simple observer. Anyway, after talking about and Sabina asking what the roles are, it was an interesting encounter today. The second update today is about the issue of migration. My brother raised this last week in his long message, and he was making the point that any migrant that settles in the host country, gets a job or gets payments, benefits, maybe sending money back to where they came from, and that money is used for economic activity or consumerism perhaps, and damaging the environment further. I think it's important to make a distinction between economic migrants and political migrants or refugees and asylum seekers. It's also important to look at where these people go to. Some countries receive many more migrants, and some countries a lot less. Like UK, it's the issue is discussed a lot, but actually last year, migrants crossing the channel was about 20,000 people. They also don't automatically receive benefits. Asylum seekers receive something like £40 a week in benefits when they're not working. But there is an important point about migration and our topic in these updates, climate change. Climate change is causing migration, and I think there's a lot of studies in Syria, for example. Whilst we can't say the cause of Syrian war is climate change, a lot of the people who work on this are now agreeing that climate change has been a great trigger for the war. There have been 3 droughts in Syria since 1980s, the longest from 2006 to 2010, the worst in about 900 years, I read in an article. And rural populations, as a result, had no choice but move to towns and cities. And this contributed to unbalancing the fragile balance between different groups in that society, whether those groups were ethnically, religiously or politically defined. And when people cram together, they're not used to living together. It does result in violence and eventually civil war in the case of Syria. So, as I said, while climate change is not the only cause, it is a trigger of Syrian war. There's lots of studies about that. There's a recent research from University of Neuchatel. I hope I said that right. This is a university in Switzerland. And this person looked at, I'll put a link if I can, looked at the rainfall changes and their effect on migration of rural population in Turkey, in fact. 71 provinces and rainfall and migration patterns between 2008 and 2018. He could associate below average rainfall with a drop in the rural income, per person income, and associate that with an increased migration from rural areas to towns. The key here, I guess, is not to fight the people in the borders or blame them for wanting to migrate, but help keep people where they live, help them adapt to a changing climate, create them work opportunities, and really help them stay where they are. I guess it's a political decision whether we think people willingly leave or they don't. But the discussion here is more about the impact of climate change. I interviewed Lord Deben this afternoon in the Turkish pavilion. Lord Deben, also known as John Gummer, was a Minister of Environment in UK government from, I think, most of the 1990s as an environment minister. but also in politics as an MP in various roles from 1970 to 2010, bar a bit of a break. So he is now in House of Lords, but he's also the chair of UK Climate Change Committee. And I was interviewing him in terms of how the Climate Change Act in UK works, Climate Change Committee works, in terms of advising the government and setting up mitigation budgets as well as adaptation planning. He finished the interview by saying that actually climate change is the biggest threat to world security. He said, people say the wars start because of religion or because of territory, money, ethnicity, whatever. But he said actually in the context he was talking about, it's because people fight for water for their children or their grandchildren, or food. When their basic needs are threatened, they go to war. He also was very eager to point out that we need to talk about both optimism and apocalypse. He said you need to remind people how bad things can be, but give them optimism that it is possible to avoid apocalypse. Again, I hope I said that word right as well. I'm very tired today. I recommend you watch that interview, actually. He is a fantastic narrator, almost, fantastic talker. You ask him one question and he answers about 5. And I tried to hold my own in interviewing him. But yes, I think you will find some very valuable nuggets of information and anecdotes from his political and personal life, as well as his suggestions as to how governments and private sector and NGOs should tackle this challenge of climate change. But I was meaning to cover migration today, but it was also very interesting that without knowing this, he did end his answers with linking climate change to risk of war and security. We will, of course, share the YouTube link to that interview in the show notes and on our website. Tomorrow, I'm hoping to speak to someone about today's subject in the program. Today was gender and science and technology. And also tomorrow, I'm going to an award ceremony for the Climate Challenge COP. And one of our projects is at FTech is up for an award. To be more specific, the farm is up for a award, and we've done some work for the farm. Anyway, I don't think we'll win, but I think recognition of being nominated is more than enough joy and encouragement for me. Anyway, wish us luck, and we'll speak again tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and we'd love to hear from you on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.